homeless girl gave her only blanket to a freezing, abandoned child. This single act of mercy was witnessed, triggering an avalanche of events that would bring a notorious brotherhood to a standstill, unravel a dangerous conspiracy, and forge an unlikely family from the coldest night. If you're new here, subscribe and comment your location. Now let's begin. "You'll freeze, kid. Take it back." The voice, gravelly and low, cut through the drumming rain and the baby's thin, frantic cries. Under the concrete belly of the Grant Street Bridge, 16-year-old Mercy didn't look up. Her fingers, blue-tipped and trembling, were busy tucking the last frayed corner of her grey wool blanket around the shivering infant strapped into a broken, rusted stroller. "He's smaller," she whispered, more to the baby than to the stranger. She smoothed a hand over the now-covered lump, her own threadbare jacket instantly soaked through by the icy November downpour. A motorcycle headlight, a single cyclops eye, had been the only witness to her discovery moments before. She'd been huddled in her usual nook, trying to become one with the damp wall when the whimpering had reached her. It wasn't a stray cat. It was a human sound, a desperate, tiny plea. She found the stroller wedged behind a pillar, one wheel bent, the baby's face blotchy and cold, wrapped in only a thin, wet onesie. Without a second thought, Mercy had shed her only source of warmth. The owner of the voice dismounted his bike, the heavy chrome machine letting out a sigh of metal as he kicked the stand down. His boots, thick-soled and worn, splashed through the puddles approaching her. Mercy finally glanced up, a flicker of fear in her dark eyes. The man was massive, a mountain of soaked denim and leather. A patch on his chest read "Prospect" above the winged death's head of the Hells Angels. He wasn't old, maybe late 20s, with a sharp, handsome face half hidden by a dripping beard, and eyes that held a surprising, stormy intensity. "I said take it back," he repeated, standing over her. He was Paul. "No," Mercy said, her voice gaining a stubborn strength. She placed herself slightly between him and the stroller. The baby's cries had softened to hiccuping whimpers beneath the blanket. Paul stared at her, then at the bundled baby, then back at her shivering form. Something in his jaw tightened. He saw the fierce maternal defiance in her eyes, a fire that contrasted violently with her obvious vulnerability. He muttered a curse not at her, but at the situation, at the rain, at the world. In one fluid motion, he shrugged out of his heavy, lined leather cut, the patches dripping, and draped it over Mercy's shoulders. It weighed a ton, smelling of gasoline, rain, and a faint, spicy cologne. Before she could protest, he had pulled out a phone, thumbing a single speed dial number. "Ace, it's Paul, under the Grant Street Bridge. I need the crew, all of them, and call Doc. No, not that kind of Doc, a real one, a baby Doc. There's a kid and an angel." He listened for a second, his eyes never leaving Mercy, who was clutching the oversized leather around her, stunned into silence. "Just move," he growled into the phone and hung up. What happened next wasn't something the city had ever seen. Within 40 minutes, the rain-slicked streets leading to the bridge began to vibrate, not with thunder, but with the synchronized rumble of Harley-Davidson engines. One by one, then in groups of 5 and 10, they rolled in, a convoy of steel and purpose. Men and women, clad in the same formidable leather, faces set in grim lines, guided their bikes onto the bridge apron and the service road below. They didn't park neatly. They created a perimeter, a barricade of flesh, bone, and motorcycle steel. Paul, now back in a spare cut someone had brought, directed them with silent hand gestures. Big Tom, a mountain of a man with a beard like a blackthorn bush, took a position at the bridge's north entrance, arms crossed, looking like an annoyed Norse god. Elena, her long silver hair braided down her back under her colors, coordinated the south side with the efficiency of a field marshal. They were 150 strong, and they simply stood. They formed a living, breathing wall between the punishing wind, whipping off the river, and the little alcove where Mercy and the baby waited. The rain didn't stop. It soaked them, dripped from their nose rings and beards, traced paths through tattooed sleeves. But not one of them moved. They lit cigarettes under cupped hands, shared flasks, not of liquor, but of hot coffee passed from a support van that had arrived, and they held the line. They were a human shield against the storm. Mercy watched, mesmerized and terrified, from under Paul's cut. She was surrounded by legends, by men and women whose names were muttered in warnings, and they were here because of her, because of the baby. A modified van, discreet and fast, slid through the cordon. Two people jumped out, a man and a woman carrying serious medical bags. Doc and his wife, Jessica, a pediatric nurse. They didn't flinch at the surrounding gallery of bikers. They knelt by the stroller. Paul stood beside Mercy, a silent sentinel. He handed her a thermos cup of steaming broth someone had thrust into his hands. "Drink," he said, his voice softer now. She took it, her fingers brushing his. A charge, simple and human, passed between them. His eyes held hers for a beat too long, and she saw not just the hardened biker, but a man deeply, unsettlingly moved. The medical examination was tense and quiet. Doc shone a penlight, listened to the baby's chest with a stethoscope. Jessica gently checked limbs, temperature, then Doc went very still. He pulled back the blanket further, examining the baby's back, then his tiny wrists. He looked up at Paul, his expression unreadable. "Paul, a word." They stepped a few feet away, but the acoustics under the bridge carried the doctor's hushed, urgent tone to Mercy's ears. "This baby, he's about 4 months old. He's malnourished, hypothermic, but he's fighting. That's not what's Paul. He has a birthmark, a very distinct one, a port wine stain shaped almost like a crescent moon here on his lower back, and his wrists, there are faint marks, like he's been tied." Paul's face darkened, so he was taken, dumped. Doc shook his head, lowering his voice further. "I saw an alert this morning, a statewide Amber Alert. The Randall baby, Lucas Randall, 4 months old, son of David Randall." The name hit Paul like a physical blow. Every biker within earshot seemed to stiffen. David Randall wasn't just a wealthy businessman, he was a rival, not in clubs, but in certain, less legal enterprises that operated in the city's gray shadows. There was a tense, unspoken understanding, a fragile peace, between Randall's organization and the established, old-school structure of the Angels. This changed everything. "Randall's kid," Paul breathed, his eyes flicking to the baby, then to Mercy, who was watching them wide-eyed. Who'd be stupid enough to snatch his heir? "Someone who wants a war," Big Tom rumbled, having overheard. "Someone who dumps the kid here, under our bridge, in our territory. This isn't a coincidence, brother. This is a frame. They want Randall to think we took his boy." A cold, dangerous silence fell, broken only by the rain and the idle rumble of a few engines. The act of charity had just plunged them into the heart of a potential gang war. Paul walked back to Mercy. He crouched down in front of her, his eyes level with hers. "What's your name?" "Mercy," she whispered. "Mercy," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "You might have just saved more than this baby's life. You might have saved a whole lot of people from a bloodbath, but we're in deep water now." "What's happening?" she asked, her voice small. "That baby is someone very important, and someone very bad wanted him to disappear on our doorstep. We can't call the cops yet, not until we know who's behind this, and we can't give him to his father until we can guarantee his safety and prove it wasn't us." He made a decision, standing tall and addressing the gathered members. His voice carried, clear and commanding. "The baby stays with us. We protect him and her." He nodded at Mercy. "We find out who did this. Clean, quiet, no wars unless they start it, but we hold this ground." A unified, grim nod passed through the crowd. The Hells Angels had just adopted an infant and a homeless girl. The following days were a surreal whirlwind for Mercy. She was taken, with the baby, now called Little Luke by the bikers, to a secluded, heavily guarded clubhouse compound on the city's outskirts. It was part warehouse, part garage, part fortress, and now part nursery. Mercy was given a warm room, real food, and clothes that weren't damp, but she wasn't a prisoner. She was, inexplicably, under the protection of the most feared motorcycle club in the state, and Paul was always there. He assigned himself as her and the baby's primary protector. The chemistry between them was a slow, burning fuse. During a late-night feeding, with little Luke finally sleeping peacefully in a proper crib donated by Alina, Mercy found Paul in the clubhouse kitchen, cleaning his gun with a methodical, focused rhythm. "You don't have to do this," she said, leaning against the doorway, wrapped in a blanket over her new clothes. "Any of this for me." He didn't look up. "Yes, I do." He reassembled the weapon with practiced ease. "You gave your only blanket. In my world, that's the highest currency there is. Loyalty, sacrifice. You paid a debt you didn't even owe. We owe you now." "It wasn't a transaction," she said, a hint of her old fire returning. He finally looked at her, his gaze piercing. "I know, that's what makes it matter." Another night, she walked in on him singing a rough, off-key lullaby to a fussy Luke. It was a Johnny Cash tune, but slowed down. He stopped abruptly when he saw her, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "Sorry," he muttered, embarrassed. "Don't stop," she said, her heart aching in a way she didn't understand. "He likes it." They began to talk. She learned about his past, a childhood not unlike hers in its loneliness, but one that found family in the club. He learned about hers, a foster system shuffle that led to the streets at 15. The conversations were charged, filled with long looks and accidental touches that sent sparks through them both. Once, while showing her how to check the security monitors, he stood behind her, his chest nearly brushing her back, his breath warm on her neck as he pointed to a screen. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken desire. He pulled away first, his knuckles white where he gripped the table, the moment safely in the realm of YouTube-safe tension, but brimming with promise. Meanwhile, the club's intelligence network, a web of bartenders, mechanics, and people who knew things, was working. Ace, the club's sergeant-at-arms and a tech wizard, traced the broken stroller to a dumpster behind a pharmacy miles away. Security footage, procured through means Mercy didn't ask about, showed a nondescript man buying formula and diapers there days before. The face was blurred, but the build was familiar to Big Tom. "That's Marcus," Tom grunted, pointing at the grainy image on Ace's laptop in the clubhouse war room. "Low-level enforcer, works for the Bratva, but he's a freelancer, a ghost for hire." The Russian mob, they were the wild card trying to muscle in on both Randall and the Angels' operations. This was their play: kidnap Randall's son, dump him in Angels' territory, let the two giants destroy each other, and swoop in for the remains. Suspense ratcheted up, patrols doubled. Tensions with Randall's men, who were scouring the city, came to a head when two of Randall's button men were caught snooping near the compound. A standoff ensued, knives and guns glinting under the security lights. It was Paul, with Mercy standing bravely behind him holding Luke, who defused it. "Look at him," Paul roared at Randall's lieutenant, a slick man named James. "Does he look hurt? We found him. We're keeping him safe from the people who actually took him, the Russians. Go tell David Randall if he wants his son back alive and his enemies handed to him, he backs off and lets us work." James, seeing the healthy baby in Mercy's arms, the protective circle of bikers, reluctantly stood down. An uneasy, temporary truce was formed. The break came from an unexpected source, Mercy herself. Watching the footage of the kidnapper Marcus, she noticed something. "His walk," she said suddenly. "That limp, it's not an injury, it's a habit. He's favoring his right leg. I've seen that walk. Before I lived under the bridge. I was sleeping in a doorway over on Elm by that old jazz bar. A guy with that walk, he'd come out of the service entrance every Thursday night around midnight. He'd throw bags in a van." It was enough. The club staked out the jazz bar. For 2 nights, nothing. On the third, a Thursday, a man with the limping gait emerged. It was Marcus. He was followed to a dingy apartment across town. The raid was swift and brutal, a masterpiece of controlled violence. At 3 a.m., the Hells Angels moved in. No police, no sirens, just the silent approach, then the door coming off its hinges. Paul led the charge. Inside, they found Marcus, along with computer files detailing the entire plot, emails to a known Bratva lieutenant, plans, payments, proof. But they also found something else. A second baby crib empty, a woman's photo on the fridge, Marcus's sister, who Ace quickly uncovered, had lost her own child to CPS months ago. The plot had a personal, twisted layer. Marcus was paid, but he was also clearly unhinged by grief, planning to eventually keep Luke for himself. Back at the compound, with the evidence secured, Paul made the call to David Randall. The meeting was set for neutral ground, the very same Grant Street bridge, at dawn. The storm had passed, leaving a clean, cold sky. The bridge was lined once more with Hell's Angels, but this time they were a guard of honor. In the center stood Paul and Mercy. Mercy held little Luke, now clean, healthy, and swaddled in a new, soft blue blanket, a gift from Elena. A convoy of black SUVs arrived. David Randall, a man in his 50s with sharp, anxious eyes, emerged, surrounded by his own security. He froze when he saw the baby. Paul stepped forward, holding out a tablet with the evidence. "Your son, Mr. Randall, the men who took him are secured in a van over there. Their confession, their plans, it's all there. The Russians, we're giving them to you as a gesture of good faith." Randall hurried forward, his composure breaking as he looked at his son. He gently took Luke from Mercy, tears in his eyes. He looked from his son to Mercy's gentle face, to Paul's stern one, to the army of bikers behind them. You protected him," Randall said, his voice choked. "She did," Paul said, placing a hand on Mercy's shoulder. The gesture was possessive, protective, and proud. "She gave him her only blanket on a freezing night. We just made sure the storm didn't come back for him." Randall nodded, a world of understanding passing between the two powerful men. The path to peace, or at least a respectful détente, was opened not by force, but by an act of mercy. As Randall's convoy pulled away with Luke, a profound silence settled on the bridge. The mission was over, the war was averted. Paul turned to Mercy. The rising sun cast a golden halo around her messy hair. She looked lost, the purpose of the last week gone. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Paul looked at her, at this fierce, selfless girl who had walked into his life and turned it upside down without even trying. He thought of the empty room at the compound, of the quiet conversations, of the electric charge he felt every time she was near. "Now," he said, stepping closer, his voice rough with emotion. "Now, if you want, you come home, not to a room, home with me." It wasn't a proposal from a prince. It was an offer from a biker, raw and real. A sharing of his life, his family, his messy, dangerous, loyal world. Mercy looked into his stormy eyes and saw the shelter she'd been searching for all her life. Not in four walls, but in a person. She saw the family she never had, standing behind him, waiting. Elena gave her a small, encouraging smile. Big Tom gave a gruff nod. She didn't say yes with words. She simply stepped forward, closing the final distance between them, and leaned her head against his chest, right over the winged skull on his cut. His arms came around her, solid and sure, holding her as if she were the most precious, fragile thing he'd ever touched. Around them, 150 Hell's Angels let out a collective, low rumble of approval, not a roar, but a sound of profound satisfaction. The engines coughed to life, but this time, the sound was different. It wasn't a threat. It was a victory song, a homecoming march. As the sun fully cleared the horizon, bathing the city in light, the rumble of the engines faded down the street, leaving the Grant Street Bridge quiet and empty once more. But under its concrete expanse, the ghost of a simple, profound act lingered, the moment a girl with nothing gave everything, and in return found a family, a love, and a future she never dared to dream of. The storm was over, and for Mercy and Paul, a new road together was just beginning. The rumble of the motorcycles faded into the morning traffic, leaving a strange, ringing quiet in Mercy's ears. She was on the back of Paul's bike, her arms wrapped tightly around his waist, her cheek pressed against the cool, worn leather of his back. The wind was a physical thing now, not an enemy to hide from, but a force to ride with. She could feel the powerful engine vibrating through her entire body, a primal rhythm that matched the frantic beat of her heart. They weren't heading back to the compound. Instead, Paul took a series of turns that led them away from the industrial zones, climbing into the wooded hills that overlooked the city. He pulled the bike onto a gravel driveway that wound through tall pines, ending at a modest, cedar-shingled house with a wide porch. It was secluded, peaceful, a world away from the grit under the bridge and the fortified clubhouse. He killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. He turned, helping her off the bike, his hands lingering on her waist. "My place," he said simply, his voice a low hum in the quiet, "when I need to be just me." The inside was a surprise. It was clean, spare, but warm. Exposed wood beams, a stone fireplace, walls lined with books instead of trophies or weapons. A large, worn leather sofa faced the hearth, and a big window looked out over the misty treetops towards the distant skyline. It was the home of a thinking man, a private man, not the prospect everyone saw. "It's beautiful," Mercy breathed, standing in the middle of the living room, feeling impossibly out of place in her new jeans and sweater. "It's quiet," Paul said, watching her. He shrugged off his cut, hanging it carefully on a peg by the door, and moved to the fireplace, crouching to build a fire. The mundane, domestic act seemed profoundly intimate. The muscles in his back shifted under his thin t-shirt as he arranged the logs. Mercy watched, a heat spreading through her that had nothing to do with the soon-to-be flames. "You're staring," he said without turning around, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Sorry," she murmured, but didn't look away. He lit the kindling. An orange light bloomed, casting dancing shadows on his sharp features as he stood and faced her. The space between them crackled with the same tension as the new fire. "Are you hungry?" he asked. She was filled with a buzzing, nervous energy. "No." "Thirsty?" She shook her head. He took a step towards her, then another. He stopped an arm's length away, his eyes searching her face. "What do you need, Mercy?" The question was layered, weighted. It wasn't about food or drink. It was about everything: safety, trust, a future. "I don't know," she whispered honestly. "I've never had a choice before." He closed the final distance, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. His thumb brushed over the curve of her cheekbone, a touch so gentle it made her eyes sting. "You have choices now, all of them. You can stay here. You can have a room at the clubhouse. You can take the stack of cash Alina will try to give you and go anywhere in the world. The only thing you can't do is disappear back under that bridge. That choice is gone." The promise, the protection in his words, was absolute. It was the most romantic, thrilling thing she'd ever heard. "What do you want?" she threw back at him, her own courage flaring. A slow, devastating smile touched his lips, the first real one she'd ever seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines, making his eyes spark. "I want you to stay here with me, but not because you have nowhere else to go, because you want to." It was her turn to step forward, erasing the last inch between them. She rose on her toes, her body aligning with his, and pressed her lips to his. It was not a timid kiss. It was an answer, a claiming, a release of all the charged moments and stolen glances of the past week. He responded instantly, a low groan vibrating in his chest as his arms banded around her, pulling her flush against him. The kiss deepened, hungry and searching, speaking of loneliness and finding, of darkness and sudden, blazing light. It was passionate, charged, deeply sensual, the kind of kiss that promised everything that was to come, but it remained just barely within the bounds of what could be described, a feverish, breathless meeting of souls as much as bodies. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "That's a hell of a choice," he rasped. She smiled, a real, unguarded smile that lit up her whole face. "It's the only one that makes sense." Life didn't become a fairy tale. It became something better, real. Mercy didn't move into Paul's house that day, she eased into it. There were rules, even in this new world. Paul was still a prospect, which meant he had duties, runs, and a hierarchy to respect. The club was his family, his lifeblood, and Mercy was now a part of that ecosystem. Her first official club function was a barbecue at the compound to celebrate the resolution of the Randall situation. Mercy was terrified. These were the people whose mere presence could clear a bar. She wore her new clothes like armor, sticking close to Paul's side. She was introduced around. To Prez, the club president, an older, grizzled man named Mark with eyes like chips of flint who shook her hand solemnly and said, "Any friend of Paul's is a friend of the club, and any angel who acts like you did is family." The formality of it made her blush. Then there was Alina, who pulled her into a fierce, perfumed hug. "Finally, a woman around here with some sense," she declared, leading Mercy to a table where other old ladies and club girls were sitting. They were a tough, savvy, wildly varied group who subjected her to gentle but probing questions over beers. They were testing her, not with malice, but to see if she was strong enough, loyal enough, for Paul and for the life. The comedy came in unexpected bursts, like watching 65 heavily tattooed Big Tom attempting to assemble a brand new pastel-colored baby swing he'd inexplicably bought for when the Randall kid visits. He sat cross-legged on the clubhouse floor, swearing softly at the instructions, tiny plastic parts scattered around him like confetti, while a prospect named Danny filmed the whole thing on his phone, giggling. "It says align tab A with slot B, Tom," Danny squeaked, dodging a thrown washer. "I'll align my foot with your ass in a minute," Tom growled, holding up two pieces that clearly did not fit. Mercy, watching from the kitchen doorway with Paul, laughed until her sides hurt. Paul squeezed her shoulder, a silent, shared moment of joy. The romance between her and Paul was a slow, smoldering build. It was in the way he'd leave a fresh cup of coffee for her on the porch table every morning before he left for the garage. It was in the way she'd wait up for him on nights he had club business, reading by the fire, and he'd come in, smelling of night air and engine grease, and just hold her for long minutes before saying a word. It was in the charged, playful moments, him chasing her with a cold soda can after a water fight started while washing his bike, her shrieking with laughter until he caught her, and the playfulness turned into something hotter, more urgent, ending with breathless kisses against the cool metal of the Harley. He taught her to ride on the back, not just as a passenger, but the physics of it, how to lean with him, to become part of the machine. The first time they took a long ride out to the coast, the open road stretching before them, the world a blur of green and blue, she felt a freedom so profound she shouted it into the wind. He turned his head, his smile visible in the mirror, and her heart soared. But the shadow of the life was always there, a reminder that this wasn't a normal courtship. 2 weeks after the bridge, Paul came home with a fresh, angry cut over his eyebrow and a split lip. He tried to shrug it off. Disagreement with a guy who thought the truce with Randall meant he could move product on our strip. It's handled. Mercy's hands trembled as she cleaned the cut with antiseptic wipes. The reality of the violence, the ever-present danger, hit her like a physical blow. Is this every day? He caught her wrist, stilling her hands. His gaze was serious. "No, but it's some days. This is who I am, Mercy. This is the life. I can't give up the club, I won't. It's my family, my code. But I can promise you this, you will never be unprotected, and I will always come home to you." It wasn't the promise of a safe life. It was the promise of a loyal one, and for a girl who'd never had either, it was enough, more than enough. Her past, however, wasn't finished with her. She'd been using a basic phone Paul gave her. One afternoon, while he was at the club garage, it rang with an unknown number. "Mercy, Mercy, is that you?" The woman's voice on the other end was frail, tearful. Mercy's blood ran cold. Aunt Ruth. It was her foster mother from 3 homes ago, the only one who had ever been kind. Before illness had forced Mercy back into the system. "Oh honey, I saw you on the news. That blurry picture from the bridge story, I knew it was you. I've been so worried. Are you safe? Are you with those bikers?" Mercy's throat tightened. "I'm safe, Aunt Ruth. I'm with someone. He's good. They're good to me." "I'm in hospice, honey," Ruth said, her voice breaking. "It's the cancer. I don't have long. I needed to hear your voice, to know you were okay." The call left Mercy shattered. This woman, a tiny beacon of kindness in a childhood of darkness, was dying alone. Paul found her on the porch steps, knees drawn to her chest, silent tears tracking down her face. He didn't ask. He just sat beside her, put his arm around her, and waited. When the story came out in choked sobs, he simply said, "We'll go tomorrow." "It's 2 states away," she whispered. "So we'll ride," he said, as if it were nothing. The next morning, Paul wasn't alone. Elena pulled up in a vintage Cadillac, its trunk packed with a small suitcase for Mercy. "The boys are taking the bikes. You and I are taking the land yacht. More comfortable, and we can talk," she winked. It was a convoy, Paul, Big Tom, Ace, and 2 other brothers on their bikes, with Elena's caddy in the middle. They rode for hours, a protective phalanx around Mercy, taking her to say goodbye. At the hospice, the sight of the leather-clad, tattooed men caused a minor panic among the staff, until Mercy, holding Paul's hand, walked calmly to Ruth's room. Ruth, tiny and frail in the bed, her eyes widened, then filled with peace when she saw Mercy's face, saw the way Paul stood protectively behind her, his hand a steadying presence on her shoulder. They spent the afternoon there. Big Tom, of all people, sat quietly in the corner, his massive presence somehow comforting. Elena fussed with Ruth's blankets and told outrageous, funny stories that made the old woman laugh weakly. When it was time to leave, Ruth held Mercy's hand. "You found your family, child," she whispered, her eyes flicking to Paul. "They're rough-looking, but I see their hearts. You're home." They rode back through the night. Mercy, in the passenger seat of the caddy, watched the silhouette of Paul on his bike ahead of them, a dark shape against the moonlit highway. Her heart was heavy with grief, but also impossibly full. She was home. The final test came from an old enemy, the streets. Paul had started teaching her self-defense in the clearing behind his house. It was practical, he said. One afternoon, he sent her on a simple errand to a market in a relatively safe part of town, a test of her independence. "Take the truck, be back by 6. She was in the parking lot, loading groceries, when a familiar, slimy voice hit her ears. "Well, look who's all cleaned up. Little Mercy, heard you found some sugar daddy with a motorcycle." She froze. It was Derek, a low-level dealer and predator who'd lurked around her old spots, offering protection for favors she'd always refused. He was with 2 other men, looking gaunt and desperate. "Leave me alone, Derek," she said, her voice surprisingly steady as she slammed the truck door. "Or what, you gonna call your biker boyfriends?" He sauntered closer, his eyes roaming over her new clothes with contempt. "They're not here, and that truck looks expensive. Maybe you give us what's in your wallet, and we forget we saw you." Mercy felt the old fear, cold and paralyzing, but then she heard Paul's voice in her head. "You're not a victim anymore, you're one of us, act like it." She remembered the moves, the leverage points. As Derek reached for her, she didn't flinch. She moved. She grabbed his extended wrist, twisted it down and around using his own momentum, and drove her knee up hard, not into his groin, but into his inner thigh, the femoral pressure point Paul had shown her. Derek howled, buckling. His friends stared, stunned. Mercy didn't wait. She got in the truck, locked the doors, and started the engine. Her hands were shaking, but her spirit was iron. She looked at Derek, writhing on the asphalt through the windshield. "He is my biker boyfriend," she said calmly, though he couldn't hear her, "and you just made a very big mistake." She called Paul, not hysterical, but clear and concise. "Derek, from my old life. He and 2 others just tried to rob me in the Market Basket parking lot. I handled Derek. The others ran. I'm safe. I'm coming home." There was a beat of dead silence on the phone. Then Paul's voice, colder than she'd ever heard it, but laced with immense pride. "Good girl, drive straight home, don't speed." By the time she pulled up the gravel driveway, Paul and 3 other prospects were already there, waiting. He strode to the truck, yanked the door open, and pulled her into a crushing embrace, checking her over for any injury. "You're sure you're okay?" "I'm fine," he's not. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Tell me everything." She did. When she finished, his expression turned grim. "He won't bother you again, ever." She believed him, not with fear, but with a profound sense of safety. The streets had tried to reclaim her, and she had fought them off. She was no longer prey. She was protected, and she was a protector. That night by the fire, Paul didn't read or tinker. He just looked at her, his gaze full of a fierce, awestruck love. "You amaze me," he said quietly. "You saved me," she replied. "No mercy," he said, taking her hand, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles. "You saved yourself. You saved that baby. You just allowed me to be there for the after." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black velvet box. Mercy's breath hitched. He didn't open it. He just held it, his eyes locked on hers. "This isn't a proposal, not yet. That'll come with a ring on my knee, the whole thing. This is a promise." He opened the box. Inside wasn't a diamond, but a small, exquisitely crafted silver pendant, a single detailed feather. "It's for the wing," he said, his voice thick. "The one you earned under that bridge. You're one of us, Mercy, not a member, but the heart of it. This is my promise that this life, my life, is yours, whenever you're ready for the rest of it." Tears spilled freely down her cheeks as he fastened the delicate chain around her neck. The feather rested just above her heart, cool then warming against her skin. It was a symbol far more meaningful than any gem. It was belonging. She kissed him, pouring all her gratitude, her love, her fierce, hard-won hope into it. The kiss turned slow, deep, and full of a promise of its own. He lifted her into his arms, carrying her to the bedroom, where the only sounds were the crackling fire and their whispered vows against each other's skin. The scene faded to the intimacy of tangled limbs and shared breath, to the profound knowledge that they had both been lost, and now, against all odds, were found. Months later, the Grant Street Bridge was just a bridge again. But in the city's underworld, a new legend had taken root. The story of the 150 Hells Angels who became a human shield for a baby and a homeless girl. It cemented a fragile peace with David Randall, who had, with the Angels, delivered evidence, waged a devastating and quiet war against the Russian incursion. A check for a staggering sum, made out to Mercy's future, arrived at the clubhouse, which Paul, after a long talk with Mercy, deposited into a trust for her education. Mercy got her GED. She started community college classes in social work with the full, roaring support of the club. She volunteered at a women's shelter, using her experience to help others. She was, Elena declared proudly, our little scholar. And Paul, he patched in. No longer a prospect, he became a full-patch member of the Hells Angels. The ceremony was private, intense. When he walked into the clubhouse that night with the winged death's head now fully earned on his back, his eyes found Mercy first. The pride in her eyes was his greatest reward. The final scene was under a different bridge, on a sunny day. Paul and Mercy were on his bike, paused during a ride. It was the spot where he'd first taught her to lean into a curve. He felt her tap his shoulder and point. Under the bridge, tucked in a dry, clean nook, was a neatly folded stack of blankets, some canned food and bottled water. A note in Mercy's handwriting was laminated and tied to it. If you need this, take it. No questions, a friend left it. It was a small, ongoing project of hers, funded by the club's Community Outreach Fund, a phrase that made Big Tom snort, but he contributed to generously. Paul turned his head, looking at the woman behind him, the silver feather glinting at her throat in the dappled light. She wasn't the girl he'd found shivering in the rain. She was strong, radiant, his equal in every way that mattered. "Ready to go home?" he asked, his voice filled with a love as solid and unshakable as the road beneath them. Mercy wrapped her arms around him, resting her chin on his shoulder. She looked ahead, at the open road, at the future they were building together, a future born from a single act of kindness on a stormy night. "Yeah," she said, her voice sure and strong, "let's go home." The engine roared to life, a powerful, living sound that echoed off the concrete, a triumphant note in the symphony of the city. It wasn't an end, but a beginning. The road stretched out before them, long and winding, and they rode into it together. A year later, under a string of fairy lights at the compound, Paul knelt, not on concrete, but on packed earth. No velvet box this time, but a simple, perfect diamond. Around them, 150 brothers and sisters fell silent. "Mercy," he said, his voice carrying, "you were the peace in my storm, my family, my heart, marry me." Her yes was lost in the roaring cheer that shook the rafters. The girl who had nothing now had everything: a ring, a family, a man whose love was as fierce and unbreakable as the road they ride together forever. Thank you for watching. Would you have given your only blanket away? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and hit subscribe. You never know when a single act of kindness might change your world, and we'll be here to share that next incredible story with you.